Good afternoon and welcome along, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Chantal Broderick, and it's my absolute pleasure to be your host for today's webinar by OneMusic, which is on music licensing and the fitness sector. Today, we're going to be discussing how music licensing works and how it may apply to your business. This presentation is suited for all exercise professionals, whether you're a gym owner, a personal trainer, group fitness instructor, yoga, Pilates, martial arts studio owners, and instructors. Today's webinar, we're going to cover how to set up and customize a music license for your fitness business, how licensing applies to different business models, key copyright considerations that every fitness business should know, and how music creators benefit from licensing fees. We will get the webinar started in just a minute, but first, on behalf of AusActive and OneMusic, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Today's webinar will be presented by Jose Horn. Jose is the National Licensing Manager, Key Accounts at OneMusic Australia. Also joining us from the OneMusic team and here to help answer any questions that you might have during the session, we've got Account Manager Iwan Jansen and Licensing Representative John Alexander Matsos. Now, a few quick but important pieces of housekeeping before we get started. If you've got any questions during today's session, can you please add them to the Q&A box? So there's a Q&A box on your screen. Any questions, please add them in there. That's going to enable the OneMusic team to properly answer your questions. And if we have time, we'll jump on and share some of those questions and answers live with the group during the session. Of course, as always, I just ask that you always ask those questions respectfully. I am very happy to say that today's session will be recorded and that recording will be sent to you via email later on today. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, the National Licensing Manager Key Accounts for OneMusic Australia, Jose Horn. Over to you, Jose.
Thank you, Chantal. Hello, everybody. I really appreciate everyone jumping on today. My name's Jose. I work for OneMusic in the fitness space and have done for a number of years. I'm coming to you from Wajak Noongar land here in the beautiful southwest of Australia. Ahead of what we will discuss, I guess some of what we'll try to run through today is to just explain what OneMusic is, discuss some of the benefits of using music in your business, and go through some of the basics of music licensing in fitness. So a little disclaimer for some of you that have had some contact with us in the past or some understanding of this. We are going to cover a lot of information. There is just so much info and data out there regarding this stuff. So we will do our best to be as informative as possible. Some things we may have to skim over. Some things may seem a little dense. But as Chantal mentioned, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, either through the Q&A during the presentation or afterwards, whenever you may need to get in touch with us. We're absolutely happy to talk to you. So let's get stuck straight into it. What is OneMusic? So OneMusic is an organization that was the coming together of basically two music licensing bodies. So once upon a time, you actually required two licenses for the licensing of music or copyright music in Australia. The first license was from the PPCA, which is the Phonographic Performance Company of Australia. The Phonographic Performance Company represents recording artists and record labels. So basically a lot of those products that you would buy, CDs, records, streams. So really just kind of the end production. And at the core of music licensing is APRA, which represents the interests of songwriters and publishers. So that's really the genesis of a song. And you can see how the two kind of fit together. First, you write a song, then you record it, and then you release it. And the coming together of that essentially brought about its child, which is OneMusic. So the name OneMusic really comes from the coming together of these two organizations. Um, like I said, at one point in time, businesses actually needed to engage with two different organizations for a lot of their music licensing. And we've now got a system which just provides an easy one-stop shop for most of the requirements that you may have from a business perspective. So you may ask yourself, why does anyone need a music license? I guess this is one of the most common questions that we get. And in a lot of cases, if you're already familiar with music, if you're a music lover, if you've had businesses before, then this might seem pretty straightforward. But we're mindful that a lot of people out there, especially in industries like fitness, for example, there's a lot of newcomers to the industry. There's a lot of people maybe branching out and starting their own businesses. So really, why does a person need a music license? So in short, the use of protected music requires permission. And in Australia, that permission is granted in the form of a OneMusic license. So OneMusic is actually managed by an organization called APRA AMCOS, as I mentioned earlier. And APRA was founded in 1926, essentially to represent songwriters. So by 1919, the first radio broadcast had already occurred in Australia. And by 1926, radio in Australia was a fully fledged commercial industry. And that really meant that APRA started having to issue licenses to radio stations and hospitality businesses on behalf of songwriters. So basically, radio stations were amongst the first businesses to use commercial music for commercial gain. And then shortly thereafter, hospitality businesses began using music for commercial gain. So there was a groundswell of interest in this from the creative arts industry to say, well, if these businesses are using our music to sell advertising or to sell food and drinks, then shouldn't we get a little cut of that? And that's essentially why APRA was formed. So 1926 means that we've just celebrated 100 years licensing music in Australia. And this is something that catches people by surprise, because if you've never heard of this, then to know that it's actually been in continuous operation in Australia for 100 years now is pretty amazing. And the first license we issued was actually to a hall on King Island, Tasmania. And that license is actually still active. So we've got a lot of very, very, very long-standing licenses out there in Australia. So licensing was formalised, I guess, when you fast forward to 1968, and the Copyright Act, which was the legislation that was drafted that first formalised this, was actually enacted and put into law. So the thing about the Copyright Act, which is really interesting, is that it doesn't just apply to music, but it applies to all creative endeavours. So, visual art, film, writing, so even journalism, it's all covered automatically by the protections that the Copyright Act grants a creator. Today, APRA AMCOS represents around 130,000 Australian songwriter members. So that's an active number. Obviously, there's been many more that have come and gone. And globally represents millions of rights holders from around the world. And this is, again, another question that's often asked of us is like, well, APRA and OneMusic, these are Australian organisations. So how can music from overseas also be covered by licensing here in Australia? Well, that comes about through APRA's membership of an organisation called CSAC. And CSAC is based in France, and it's actually the world's largest network in the creative sector. So it brings together 227 societies across 111 countries. And you may see from the graphic there, it represents around 5 million creators. So this is a really, really important piece of the puzzle for music and in the world generally, because it means that music that is from overseas is protected when it's used in Australia. But most importantly, it also means that Australian music is represented adequately when it's performed overseas. So that could be when it's used in a business, but it can also mean other areas like live music, for example. Say if a particular piece of Australian music makes its way to, say, a performance at the Winter Olympics that's on right now, the Italian Society would account for that and work with the Australian Society to make sure that our Australian songwriters are adequately represented and paid. So the network actually looks a little bit like this. All of the countries shaded in orange are actually covered by CSAC's network globally. Some of those ones that aren't shaded are actually kind of covered anyway, because a lot of their residents, if they do have music that is popular or well-known, will ultimately park their music with one of the societies in the orange shaded countries to make sure that they are correctly covered. So this actually results in licensing being common in, obviously, gyms, which is what brings us to this presentation today, but also for pretty much any other industry that you can think of. So retail, pubs, the live music events, things like sporting, AFL, NRL, NBL, all that stuff. And any online applications. So many of us, as you guys would know well, we enjoy services like Netflix or YouTube. And all of those ultimately require some form of permission from APRA, in the case in Australia, and from the various societies that we work with globally. One thing that's often misconstrued or misunderstood is that even government requires a license. So we currently have active licenses in place with governments at all levels, local, state, federal. And we also issue licenses to educational institutions as well. So the Copyright Act does provide quite a lot of exemptions and allowances for things like educational, kind of the use of music in true educational sort of delivery. But for any other peripheral stuff like events or, just stuff that may not really be true to core learning, then we license that stuff as well. So we deal with primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. So really, this is a very, very, very far-reaching thing, and something that is kind of there just in the background across the entire country. So I guess it leads us to a bit of the nitty-gritty, which is, how do I know that the music I'm listening to is copyright protected? And this is probably one of the most common questions, because as you can imagine, there's just so much information, so much music out there, lots of different ways that you can access it these days. And, the fact is that whilst our organisation and commercial music is the most heard and common out there, it's not the only type of music that's out there in the world. So I'll run through now the different types of music that you can access. And I think once we've run through this, you'll be able to maybe apply this to your own business and just see how the different types of music that you may have access to may have different licensing implications. And we will go through the specifics of the licensing for fitness businesses in a bit, but first we'll just run through these different categories. So at the very top of the pile, you've got full rights music. So this will be music that absolutely needs a license and for which we apply a full fee. Beneath that, you've got partial rights music, which is actually covers. So because they're covers, that original breakdown of the two licensing types actually falls away, and you only need to consider the songwriting components, which means that covers still require a license, but it's actually assessed at a slightly lower fee. And then The wild card for many of us, and I'm sure something that many of you have thought of, there are also several royalty-free and AI music services available now, which actually don't require a license from OneMusic. Um, they require maybe a subscription, but we'll run through that in a second. So, to give you an idea about full rights music really is.
Oh,
Chantel, I see
Jose,
you.
you can tell I was just about to jump in. No, I was just about to jump in. First of all, thank you because the background's been awesome. I can see that a few people have been raising their hands, and I'm aware that we don't have a chat box in the webinar this year.
Yeah.
So if anyone does want to ask a question, could you pop it into the Q&A box? So we don't have a chat box this year, it's disappeared, but we do have a Q&A box. So if you do have a question, just please find your way to the Q&A box. It should be down the bottom of your screen, and that's where you can ask any questions. Back to you, Jose.
Chantel. And to Chantel's point, please do ask these questions. We will absolutely get back to you on every single one. And if it's not in the Q&A option, like I said, you're most welcome to come back to us after the fact with some questions. And I guess this is what I was alluding to earlier. Some of this stuff we will sort of skim over because we could probably run a whole presentation on the different types of music that is available to you. But I will just say a disclaimer, which is something I maybe should have mentioned just prior to this. Whilst we can certainly advise you and give you lots of information about how to license and how to best cover the different types of music uses in your business, OneMusic is not a music service, and we also can't really provide you any advice as to what may work best in your business, but we can certainly show you where to find that information and let you have the tools in front of you to work out what's going to be best for you. So back to the different types of music. The full rights stuff is really the stuff that's the low-hanging fruit. It's the stuff that's most easily accessible. It's commercial music that is most recognizable. It's what people know and love. So it's going to be the stuff that you have really easy access to, whether it be through a music service, whether it be on the radio. Often it's what you'll hear in a film or on a TV show. So it really is just your kind of classic artists, the first stuff that pops to mind, chart music, a lot of the stuff that is going to be also the best quality, because full rights music will have that full production suite. It'll be stuff that's produced, recorded, and promoted by record labels. It'll be the best and most established songwriters behind the scenes. So that really points to why the full fee is applied in this case. It's just music that we use day in, day out, and obviously enjoy very much. In terms of the partial rights stuff, this is a little bit of a niche thing, and I think fitness really has been quite a pioneer in partial rights music. Some of you may have recalled back in, I believe it was 2007, 2008, there were some changes that were suggested by record labels in how they applied licensing to fitness businesses. And this led to a huge kind of market just popping up overnight of specialized music services that actually provided cover music. And the reason behind this was that it would be able to immediately slash the license fee that would be applicable to that music. And two of the ones that just stand out, which some of you may be pretty familiar with, one is the Les Mills PPCA-free classes, not to be confused with their full right stuff, which is their premium service. But they've got the option of you having the PPCA-free stuff. And another popular and common service in this space is Power Music. So as you can see, partial rights cover music. From those two services, you can probably get the idea that it's probably designed mostly for use in fitness classes. And I think part of that is because it can easily be kind of, I guess, it can be dressed up in a way that it doesn't sound like a cover. So it can be remixed, it can be produced in a way that, for a fitness class, for example, just sounds about right and sounds more like a remix than a cover. Um, Interestingly, free to air radio is also something that qualifies under Australian law as partial rights. And the reason for this is twofold. So free to air radio is a really great option, really, if you want to have quality music, but for a reduced license. The reason that we apply a reduced fee for that is, first of all, there's no actual recording. So there's no product that you're actually accessing. It's just a service that you're actually putting in your business. And secondly, there's also kind of an acknowledgement that there's commercials and ads and things like that often, or some talking through it. So it's not a totally clean service, and it doesn't have music running the entire span of, say, an hour. So that kind of lets it sit neatly into the partial rights category. Now, one of the questions that often comes up when we talk about radio is, well, it's called free to air radio, so surely that's free, right? Well, under Australian law, free to air radio is a term that's only applied to private and domestic use. So if you're using radio in your home, in your car, then that's absolutely fine. It's free to air. But once you use it in a business, it actually takes on a different category, which we call retransmission. And the law was pretty particular about this when the Act was set out in 1968 to say, really, these services are just for you privately, and they're not really intended for kind of commercial use. And we will touch on the modern version of that a little later on when we go through some of the fitness-specific licensing, because there's a very similar term of use that applies to some streaming services. So flowing through, the last category, which I know that there's a lot of interest in, is royalty-free and AI. So I've put there that there's no fee. There's no fee from us because we don't control this stuff. But obviously, these services will have a subscription or some sort of cost up front. So it's not that they're free as such, but there's certainly an option. In many cases, you may even find that paying for a service like this may be equivalent to paying for another service plus a license, but that's for you to research. Royalty-free and AI music, it can be handy for certain uses, for sure. One of the limitations is that there's not a whole lot of it. So we're seeing people in this space utilizing it for things like some fitness classes or some very particular targeted applications. But if you've got a need to run a lot of music in your business, or you run a lot of fitness classes, or, you just need kind of the convenience of being able to find stuff really easily, then this probably isn't going to be the right type of option for you. Not to mention the fact that it's not known to your customers. So it really kind of doesn't have that personal connection or that branding connection, for that matter, because it's kind of just generic stuff. So it has its purpose. It's obviously come a really, really long way, but you'd really want to assess whether it's the right type of option for you and for your business. So in summary, I guess if you recognize any of these logos here, which I'm sure many of you do, you're going to have a need for a license. So the different types of licenses, like I said, we'll cover in a little while, but any of these services are going to have a license requirement attached to it. Obviously, this graphic is a little bit old, to be honest. There's lots and lots more services now that are popping up, and it really is a great time to access services, especially with online delivery now. So you can get all sorts of different options. But like I said, you do have to consider that any of these services in a business will need to have a OneMusic license attached to it. And essentially, that's where we come in. So having sort of gone through some of the basics of why OneMusic exists and the different types of music that you may have access to, the question really then becomes one of, does music really matter in fitness? And I'll just take you on a little journey here, just a little segue on some of the, I guess, research and some of the consensus that exists around the power of music in fitness specifically. Again, this could probably be an entire presentation, but we'll run through a couple of key slides just to give you guys an idea of kind of where some of this comes from and, you know, maybe why you're here thinking about music in your fitness business. So this question, does music really matter in fitness, was first asked in 1911. At least that's the first time it was documented, when the 1911 version of the 6 Days of New York cycle race was run at Madison Square Garden. So this is an endurance race that's held in like a velodrome type of environment. And a researcher by the name of Leonard Ayres ran some tests across several days of this race. And he specifically had an idea. He thought, well, if I'm going to try having a marching band to play for some of the stretches. So cyclists were timed for stretches of the race, sometimes using a band, sometimes not using a band. And he was the first researcher that concluded that the cyclists were actually 8.5% faster when music was playing. So I guess this really was one of the beginning, the genesis of some of this information that has come about, which, like I said, there's heaps of info about this out there, and we can also send you some if any of you are interested. So let us know in the Q&A if you want any more information about this. Fast forwarding to modern times, but specifically Australia, Dr. Peter Terry, he is a Dean of the Graduate Research School of Psychology at the University of Southern Queensland. And he also asked himself, well, what's the power of music? So Dr. Terry concluded that the use of music has psychological responses. It has physiological responses, so obviously physical improvements, and therefore performance outcomes. And Dr. Terry's research actually concluded that music has the power to reduce perceived exhaustion by about 10%. So the way he carried out this test was to actually run tests with elite triathletes in a kind of a controlled environment on treadmills. And he would get them to, do the same exercises at the same kind of output. Some with music, some without. So very similar tests to what Leonard Ayres ran, 100 years prior. And he came out with a very, very similar outcome, which was perceived exhaustion was about 10%. So where the Ayres study actually timed the riders, what Dr. Terry was thinking about was more from the psychology point of view, like how tired do these guys feel after they've actually carried out this exercise at exactly the same output. And what he concluded was that they were about 10% less tired, I guess, in their minds, which meant that conversely, they were likely to push more because they hadn't reached their limit, which was really, really interesting. And I think this sort of stuff, there's a lot of research out there or a lot of, I guess, confirmed uses of this stuff. So I haven't included it here, but for example, one of the most famous examples of this was Haile Gebrselassie, who is a famous endurance runner who managed to convince the stadiums to play a very specific piece of music that he loved and broke world records. And he attributed breaking world records to the not only familiarity of that music, but also the tempo and just how well it fit with his running style. Furthermore, in 2015, there was a study that suggested that 95% of people say exercise is more enjoyable with music than without. So you can kind of see like all of the research really universally points to the fact that music in an exercise environment is just a general positive, and something that can really be used to the advantage of not only you as a business operator, but most importantly for your customers to get more out of what they're doing with you. Yes, Chantal.
Jose, first of all, thank you so much. I have to say, I've been doing this webinar for 4 years and I've learned even more today than what I knew previously. So this is awesome. I also wanted to say, as a cycle instructor for many, many years, I can absolutely support these statistics as far as performance and perceived exertion goes. But the reason that I was jumping on is because I just wanted to say I can see that the questions are coming in, which is unreal. The guys are working in the background to answer all of your questions. But I did want to say, if we don't get to them during the time of the webinar, please don't panic. They will get in touch. The team from OneMusic will get in touch with you and answer your questions after the webinar. So please keep asking. The questions that have come in have been absolutely excellent. So thank you. And the guys are, as I said, working to get back to you on those. But if you can't see it being answered right away, they will get back to you after the webinar. So Jose, back to you.
Thank you, Chantal. And I really, really appreciate your perspective there from someone in the business who's actually seen this stuff firsthand. I've only ever been a participant in a cycle class, but I can absolutely tell you that one of the things that I do, and not to digress and not to get too anecdotal, but I love riding on a spin bike. I've got a setup at home. It's one of the things I love most in life. And sometimes I get a little lazy and I'll, instead of putting on a class or putting on some really upbeat stuff, I'll throw on a podcast or something like that just to like kind of try to kill two birds with one stone. And I can assure you that my watch does not lie. It tells me that it wasn't as effective a class when I'm doing that stuff. So there really is something to this. And that's just my very non-scientific perspective as well. So
No, I'm totally with you there. And even as an instructor, when I'm having those days where I just don't quite have that level of energy, it just takes an amazing tune and it
mm,
changes everything. So
yeah,
unreal.
absolutely. Cool. So I guess the conclusion is we asked the question, does music really matter in fitness? And I guess the answer really is yes. I mean, it's, the research shows it, the anecdotal testimonials, Chantal's and mine, I guess, show it also. I'm sure you all agree. I mean, this is uh, exercise and music is really a match it's just so fantastic. Not only from a motivational point of view, but for example, in something like a spin class, there's really a tempo and a rhythm that can be achieved very easily through music. And it's just, a no-brainer really to kind of tap into that resource if you've got access to it. So, having been through some of the stuff we've gone through, we then, I guess, graduate to what OneMusic licenses will specifically apply to the fitness and wellbeing sector. So I know that, if there's already been a ton of questions coming through, I'm sure that there's more questions that will be upcoming because this is really the nitty-gritty of what licensing considerations you may have as a fitness business operator. And this is really what we do day in, day out from a bread and butter perspective. Like when you contact us, this is where our expertise sits, and we'll be able to give you tons of information and tons of guidance, and really just point you in the right direction as to, where to land with this stuff. So I'm going to bring up these options. So basically, in a nutshell, licenses that apply to fitness businesses will fall in one of these categories. So there's background music, music in classes, digital delivery, and then we have an all-inclusive option. So I'll take you through all of these in the moment. So in terms of background music, this is really very self-explanatory, right? So background music is the stuff that you have got playing on a continuous basis. It's intended for maybe multiple types of areas, like it could be your reception, it could be free weights gym space, it can be in change rooms and kind of, end of trip type facilities that you may have in your business. It could be, say, the audio content that's on screens, for example. So really background music is kind of like just the basic stuff. And importantly, background music is something that is uniform across, or I guess common across all industries. So this is really the most common type of license that applies, whether it be a fitness business, whether it be, a pub, whether it be a retail business. I mean, this is the stuff that we encounter day in, day out, and kind of take for granted a little bit. So the way we license background music in fitness is on a per member rate. So by member, what we mean is whoever's signed up for your business. Sometimes that might be someone who's with you for a short amount of time. It might be someone who's there for a long time. But we generally take a snapshot of how many kind of customers your business engages with at any point in time, and that will form the basis of a background music license. And the reason it's licensed on a per member rate, importantly, is because small businesses pay less and big businesses pay more. So that's really the basis behind why it's done on a per member rate. Then beyond background music, you graduate to music in classes. So this, again, pretty self-explanatory. If you're running a class and you're using music with it, then this will be the category that likely fits. I think I wouldn't be going out on a limb here to sort of, I guess, assume that quite a few of you are, say, instructors. Perhaps, people might not be necessarily running a bricks and mortar business. You might be running classes in a hall or a park or something like that. So this will really be a great category for you to sort of consider, because a lot of businesses might have background music and music in classes, but some actually, like instructor-based businesses, only have music in classes. So this is something that we really look at. So what is a class? And this is super important, because some people say to me pretty often, it's like, well, hey, the music's just playing in the background, but the class is running. It's not synchronized. Well, that synchronization model isn't really how we license it anymore. We're not really talking about kind of timed aerobics anymore. This is a legal definition that's been approved. And these three things have to be met for it to be a class. So a class has to be where protected music is audible, tick, where the class is on a timetable or advance notice. So again, sort of the standard way of advertising that class. And the class has to be led by an instructor. So if any of these things aren't met, then you can usually get around the music in classes license and stick to background music. So for example, if you don't have a timetable and you're doing it by appointment, one-on-one, two-on-one, like a personal trainer type scenario, then that's not a class. If it's, say, a virtual class where there's a video rather than actually a class being led by an instructor, again, that's not a class. So these are the sorts of conversations that we'll have with you to ensure that your specific business model fits with one of the license types that we've got. So unlike background music, which is based on members, music in classes is based on a per class rate. So we actually look at how many classes you might do in a week and then extrapolate that across a year to arrive at your license fee. In addition to background music and music in classes, something we touched on earlier is licensing services. So you can see these icons here. So we've got a license that's called digital copy and delivery. So digital delivery is usually what we refer to it as. And it's a license that covers the use of non-commercial streaming services. So these are the ones that are intended for personal use. So again, just like we spoke about free-to-air radio earlier, only being free-to-air for your home, a lot of these services that you use, like commonly Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, they're really just intended for your personal use as well. So when you transfer that to a business environment, there's this additional consideration from a licensing perspective that you have to take on. So I guess to show you some icons again, this is kind of the common suite of services that we're generally issuing a digital delivery license to. The flip side to this would be that you use like a really high-end commercial service. And if you were using a high-end commercial service, say like Nightlife or Audiolize or any number of the ones that are kind of like proper commercial background music services, then that digital delivery fee generally doesn't apply. So they'll cost you more upfront, but then you don't have the license fee on the back end. So it's kind of something that you would have to look into and assess whether it's going to be best for your business, whether it's going to work. And that's, again, stuff that we can advise you on and give you lots of advice about. So those are the three kind of core parts of fitness licensing. But we do have a fourth option, which is to license you on an all-inclusive solution. And the all-inclusive license combines all of those fitness licenses into a cost-effective member rate. So again, just like the background music license, we look at kind of how many members you've got, or that you generally operate with, and we apply a member rate. And this is most common with boutique studios, so things like Pilates studios, functional training studios, and usually it's where you might have a fairly small but very highly engaged customer base. And we also have some caps applied. So it's generally pretty effective in terms of a cost point of view. And unlike the member and class-based licenses, which can kind of go in like kind of the infinite numbers, like a lot of large businesses will have many thousands of classes and many thousands of members, the all-inclusive stuff is really designed for those businesses that may have, say, 100, 200 members. They run a bunch of classes, and then they can apply for this all-inclusive license with a really generous cap that limits how much you pay. And this is probably the most popular option that we've had in licensing, at least in modern sort of times. It's a really good way of licensing those kind of boutique studios out there. So all of this stuff that I've just gone through, again, kind of skimming over it because I'm mindful of time and of information overload, but it's all on our website. So you get heaps of information here. There's a fitness landing page. You can access an info sheet. You can access a PDF copy of the license application to look at pricing and all that sort of stuff. So I'll encourage you to visit our website, which is onemusic.com.au. So jump on, have a look, and then if you have any questions, you can just get in touch with us about that. So having been through everything we've been through, we've covered off, who we are, why licenses exist. We've covered off what type of music we license. We've covered off how licenses can be applied to a fitness business specifically. But one of the questions that we get pretty often is, well, what if I just don't do it? What if I don't license my music? What's going to happen? Well, I'll take you back to one of the earlier slides where we talked about the inception of the Copyright Act in 1968. So basically, everything that we do and the way that we operate is all grounded in law. So ultimately, this is incredibly black and white. You either are using protected music in your business or you're not using protected music in your business. Despite what some people may argue, there is literally no grey area in this. It's either you're in or you're out. So if you are using protected music, you have to take out a license. If you're not using it, you don't. And that's really what it comes down to. And that's exactly what is, I guess, reflected in the very robust and very clear laws that we have here in Australia regarding this stuff. So you may have heard recently of a federal court win that we had through APRA and OneMusic, where we actually had a very large win against a chain that didn't take out a license. And you can see the headline there, drop and give me $235,000. Well, $235,000 isn't what a license is going to cost you. That particular situation was the result of the license fees plus the legal costs plus damages that a judge handed down on these operators. So it looks like a really large number, but obviously had this person licensed their business early on, it certainly would not have been that number. So in this particular case, the process was as follows. Music use was confirmed. So, we knew that was the case. So again, back to the black and white stuff. They were definitely using protected music. The business was fully informed over a long period of time through many, many, many different avenues, whether it be phone, email, post, all sorts of stuff. So that's usually the way we do it. We'll confirm music. We'll let a business know, hey, you need a license. Let's chat. And importantly for this one, and what led to some of this extra damages and things like that, this particular business was non-compliant for many years. So the process actually dragged out to a point where it sort of got a little toxic, really, and ultimately ended up in court. And ultimately, again, black and white, it's just not a grey area. It's a no-brainer here. And in this case, they found themselves to be at a loss, and we had a win where we recouped some of this stuff. So over the years, we've had many cases like this. I mean, this is just a really recent one that we can bring up, that we can, you can find heaps of information about. It made the media because there were a few prominent people in the background that had some interest in this business. But I want to assure you guys that it's never our intention for it to get to that point. Like, ultimately, one of the most important things here is that the fitness and wellbeing industry in Australia is one of the most compliant. So overwhelmingly, your industry is incredibly receptive, incredibly responsible. The corporate responsibility, the respect for legal, for legislation, and also the respect for music and creators is really solid in the fitness industry. So much so that we've got around 8 out of 10 fitness premises in Australia that are licensed, and that's courtesy of a lot of really extensive licensing that we've got with like all the major brands, with tons and tons of independents. We're just constantly speaking to people, getting them signed up, making sure that they're on board. And really, it's a real pleasure to deal with the fitness industry, because I think, like we've mentioned, the importance of music is undeniable. So I think there's a real understanding of that, and there is therefore an understanding that just like you need a premises, just like you need electricity, and you need water, and you need a good fit out, the music is a consideration, and that has its costs associated with it too. And I think most people overwhelmingly understand and acknowledge that and respect it. So thank you to you all, because definitely one of the best industries to deal with from a licensing point of view. So I guess rounding out, you might ask yourself, well, we've talked about all of this stuff, and you've just talked about a lot of money changing hands. So where does the money actually go? Well, the money ultimately goes back to rights owners. So rights owners for us are predominantly songwriters. Often they're behind the scenes. This is a really important income stream for them. Other rights owners might involve things like, for example, music publishers. So that's companies that represent songwriters. We also send some money back to record labels. As we pointed out, OneMusic is a combination of a couple of organizations that represent record labels and songwriters. So they're also a vested party in what we do. But the headline that we'd like to leave you with is that we redistribute around 87% of licensing revenue. So this puts us around sort of a top 10 globally in terms of the 211 territories that we mentioned, and it's for a not-for-profit or profit-for-purpose organization. It's absolutely really high-end stuff, and we've been able to achieve those percentages courtesy of leveraging technology, making sure that we've got really great data, that we work with our partners on making sure that we get the money back to the right hands, both globally, but importantly, as we mentioned, the money will go to all of these countries through some of those agreements and whatnot. But overwhelmingly, and I guess something to leave you with, which is super important, is that the money ultimately stays in Australia. Like, the overwhelming majority of the monies that we collect are there to service Australian songwriters. It's a really vital piece of the puzzle for the Australian music industry and for the Australian arts industry in general. And we're really just a super integral piece of just that overall sort of industry in Australia. So, like I said, I do want to thank you all. But going back to where you can find us, please be sure to visit our website. So that's onemusic.com.au. If you want to send us any questions directly, or you ever want to be in touch, please note down this email address. It's fitness@onemusic.com.au. That one is monitored by me and a couple of the other guys. So we're there, responding to that stuff really, really, really regularly. And we'll be able to point you in the right direction to get more info. We'll be able to send you some info sheets if you want them, or we'll be able to assess, your specific business needs and give you some more advice on where you stand with things. Um, Finally, I just want to point you to this. We are running a comp at the moment where you can win VIP tickets and travel to the 2026 APRA Music Awards. That's valued at over $4,000. For any of you that don't know, the APRA Music Awards are one of the premier nights of the music industry in Australia, where songwriters are celebrated. There's a lot of great live performances from big names, and it celebrates the top songs both in Australia and globally. And it's a really fun night. So if you are interested in maybe participating and trying to get your hands on some tickets to the show, look out for our post-webinar email that will come out to you, and register for your chance to enter. So I just want to say thank you very much from me and from OneMusic. And over to you, Chantel.
Jose, thank you so much. That was an incredibly comprehensive webinar. You really shared so much information. So we're very, very grateful for the time that you've taken to do that today, to educate us all. And I think the example that you gave earlier, the copyright example that you gave, no one wants to be in that situation. So the whole point of doing these educational webinars is so that we can understand what we need to do as far as music licensing goes. And I think you've given us heaps of great information to take away. So thank you so much. We're not going to do Q&A because I think we've probably got so much info from the session that you've done. And plus, we've got about 24 or 25 questions that have been answered in the chat thread in the meantime. I do have one really important question for you, Jose, which is, can the host of the webinar enter the competition to win tickets? Does that count?
This is a highly contentious and very
Or is
political
she
question,
exempt?
Chantal. There are very, very, very limited tickets for APRA staff and for OneMusic staff. I've been very fortunate to go to one APRA Music Awards in my life, and that was about 10 years ago. I would suggest, or I would assume that the answer is no, I can't participate on this one. But you have reminded me to once again ask the
Yep.
question of the people in charge to say, hey, if there's any opportunities to come along, then please keep me in mind. So,
Well,
um,
look, I think that sounds awesome for everyone that is joining us on the webinar today. So please, as Jose mentioned, the details for that competition are going to be in the email that we send you later on this afternoon. The other thing is a copy of this recording will also be in that email. Now, I'm just having a look at the most recent questions that have come in, and there are a few people that stepped in a little bit late and probably do have some questions, and I'm pretty sure we would have covered those topics earlier on in the webinar. So perfect chance for you to jump on and have a look at the recording. Go back to what Jose has shared with us today, because I think you'll find the answers to those questions there. But a massive thank you to Jose and to Ewan and to JA and all of the team from OneMusic. Thank you for sharing that information with us all today. And also a huge thank you to every single one of you that have joined us today. I hope that you are walking away with more knowledge around music licensing. And if you do have any more questions, please make sure that you do get in touch with the OneMusic team. Jose, do you want to just flick back one slide so we can just show once again, or two slides, sorry, so we can just show that email address once again. So fitness@onemusic.com.au. So on behalf of Oz Active and the team at OneMusic, thank you all so much for joining us today. That concludes our webinar. And once again, if you want any further questions, please ask them and the team will get back to you. But it looks like we've just about covered them all off. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
everyone.